Hello, and welcome to Sacred Mindshift Circle. I'm your host, Dahlia Deborah Donalds. Today, our guest is Annette Serwanga. She is a licensed early years teacher with many years' experience. Now, as a mother of two, she has decided to dedicate her time to homeschooling her two girls at home. She owns her own consulting business to help with developing programs in schools, and her specialty is in helping children with developmental delays and behavioral challenges. She also has a master's in education. Hello, Annette. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Nice to see you, Dahlia.
So I was so fascinated by your profile. I saw you giving advice to some parents in on Facebook that needed some suggestions that they were homeschooling their kids, and I liked some of the advice that you were giving to them. And I just wanted to bring you on the show to kind of learn a little bit more about the things that you've noticed now as a teacher working in a classroom environment with a lot of children versus now homeschooling your two girls. I wanted to know, what is it like and what are the benefits and the pros of that? And how did you decide to do it?
Yes, so homeschooling my two daughters was a decision that my husband and I both made before having our firstborn in 2020. So being an early childhood professional of over 2 decades, I was very fortunate to, you know, be on the be on the ground. So I really understand the way that the school system impacts children, how communities are supported or even not supported, and some of the different challenges that I saw. I knew that my family could greatly benefit from me having our children in the home and being their first educator, the nurturer, support system, provider, giving love while still just continuing to pour into them in the most critical time in their development, which we know is in the formative years. So my husband and I, were very much on the same page and alignment as how we wanted to parent our children, support them, and then also just understanding how essential the first 5 years are. So it's really been a blessing, and I just I'm so fortunate and excited to see both of our daughters just absolutely thriving and being able to have this essential time with each other, and then just to facilitate their learning.
So, as someone who obviously has a lot of experience, can you explain a little bit why the first 5 years are so important in a child's life?
Absolutely. So when we think about development and child development, we understand how essential the first 5 years are because of brain development and what the child is actually experiencing as it relates to their environment, the way they're socialized, the way adults and other children engage them, the way they're trying to make sense of the world. So we know all of these pieces are very impactful, and it lays the groundwork and the infrastructure for the way that the child develops in their totality.
So, when you look at the theme of how most children are educated in the public system, and when I say public system, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be public school, but when they are in a large group, what are some of the cons that you think that may arise for children this young in that environment versus with a homeschooling environment? What, from your experience, what are things that you've seen?
Yeah, so for me, in my experience, I I see a different type of really a different type of care, right? So we know that children usually do thrive when they are nurtured and cared for, um, and the adult is being very transparent and loving toward the child. Especially as mothers, we know this. I'm sure you know this with having your own children. So when we think about environments we want to put our children in, we do everything in our capacity to make sure that that's being transmitted in the environment. So unfortunately, I think for a lot of families is sometimes we don't recognize what harm we could actually be doing indirectly by putting our children in environments where those critical pieces are not being poured into them. And as a mother and an educator of many years, I have I've been fortunate because my mother was very nurturing to me. So a lot of what I poured into children, most families didn't really understand. A lot of that was not just from academia and what I learned in the classroom, but it very much so came from like an internal makeup in my experience as a daughter of a child of a mother who was very nurturing and loving to me. So I was only giving them what was given to me. So as a mother, I was I knew there was no other way for me to go and then expect for something on the outside to pour into my children the way that I'm going to pour into them. So it's actually to me it was a bit unreasonable for me to then put my children in an environment when I know that that's not what those are things that I've also seen. I've seen educators that do not pour into children that way, and I think it's very harmful.
Yeah, and I think there are different types of educators. I've seen very good educators, and I've seen the ones that were on the verge of burning out. And it's interesting because you can sense it, the lack of patience sometimes to do certain things with the children, to be
Yes,
creative, to be yeah, to just try new things, new ways of teaching them. It comes to a point sometimes where depending on what's going on with the teacher, the mindset isn't there to really be focused on specifically doing the best for your child, but just kind of getting through the day. Sometimes this is
absolutely, absolutely, and you hit it on the head as well, because I've done trainings for organizations to help the educator understand what happens when the adult is dysregulated. You can't then engage and support children appropriately when you didn't take care of yourself before you came into the classroom. So of course the children are going to be dysregulated because a person caring for them is not together yet. So you're not going to engage each child appropriately and you're not going to support them appropriately. So yeah.
Yeah, and this is like actually something that I guess in society today, unfortunately, we have a lot of women in the workforce, and it's not to judge anybody because obviously even I at a certain point had to go to work and I had to leave my child with another individual or in some kind of childcare facility. And but I always, especially because of all of my experiences, have tried to stay home with my children just a little bit more or as much as I can for precisely this reason. Do you see a shift now from maybe several years ago where there's more parents deciding to homeschool their children?
Absolutely. So, like I said, in 2020 is when I had my firstborn. And granted, we know COVID hit in 2020. So, a lot of course, adjustments and changes, in the early years and across, the country, things had to adjust, right? We had to move accordingly. But that being said, what I think that also forced a lot of people to do was to really hone in on their families and on their children, right? So you had parents formally and informally becoming the educator, right? So in that, I do think that it actually helped kind of propel this surge of having that essential time with your children opposed to putting them in a quote unquote system, right? So from 2020 on up into this current 2025, by far, especially in the Black community, there are studies and research that show that there's a very large push for homeschooling our children. And a lot of those reasons are what I've already shared, right? The nurturing of your child, the support system, the community, the way your child is going to be poured into, the parents already acknowledging the reality is that you're the parent, you're the first educator anyway, right? You have the tools. You can gain additional resources, but you yourself are very skilled and have a lot to pour into your child and to offer them. And ultimately, no one is going to support your child better than you, period.
And my kids, they were very rebellious sometimes, but in the summer, when I did have time, I would try to do this. I would try to take them aside and teach them, even though they, like I mentioned before, I'm in Europe, but I would still teach them American history.
Mm,
And one of the things that I think that is a good, sorry, one of the things that I think is an advantage is that you have the ability to research all of the information. We are quite capable of finding the information, and you can teach it from a perspective also that is, I guess, where they can identify with what they're learning. I think sometimes in public school systems, depending on the state, depending what's going on and the political climate, sometimes certain stories aren't told to our
absolutely.
children, especially in the Black community, whatever, Latino community. And that gives you the opportunity to
Hmm.
start researching yourself also with your child, a lot of things that they probably might not even be taught in school. I
Right.
mean, one of the things that I was astounded by, I'm 40, and I was teaching second grade 2 years ago, and I wanted to introduce script to the children.
Mm,
It's so interesting because I saw like the other teachers kind of felt like, they never did it before and they're not interested in really doing it. It's not a big deal. It's not mandatory. And I was completely shocked because I said, this is just something that I think is basic. I think if children don't know how to write in script, they don't have to do it always. But I say, documents, historical documents are all written in script. So
mm,
you'll have a complete loss of information
right.
for a certain generations to come because no one wants to, you know, just do a little bit of extra and help the kids today learn. Whereas if you are a mom and you have that ability to decide what you want to make sure that your child is equipped, all the skills that your child's equipped with. But
Absolutely.
like I said, they can be rebellious. What
Mhm.
are some of the challenges that a lot of parents say are the reasons why homeschooling is so difficult?
Um, well, you hit on one. I wasn't going to use the word rebellious, but we'll say that. Um, I mean, like any child, children can reject, whatever they choose, right? They're autonomous, especially, understanding the different developmental stages. Okay, this is what happens at the adolescent stage. This is what my toddler is going to do. This is what the kinder is going to do. And some children, that's just also the temperament. So I think it's also about understanding your child. And I think it's another opportunity to see how children learn. And maybe that's also the educator in me as well, is that you're going to have a rebellious student, but that doesn't mean you pour into them any less. You have to find out, how does this child learn? Because either way, you need the information. So I see them all as opportunities, to find out how to get them that information. What is your learning style? What is that? That's the role of the adult. And I do think in the homeschool environment, very much so, in just like the educator in the traditional sense or environment, it's your responsibility to find out. It doesn't mean it can't be hard work, but it doesn't negate the information that they need. So, like for me, my two daughters are 3 and 4, but my 4 year old already has a lot of leadership skills. So as much as she's 4, there's a different level of maturity as it comes to information. She also seeks information. So I am also blessed in the fact that she engages with curriculum, right? She's not rejecting it. So I'm not pushing it on her. I just facilitate it and I provide the appropriate environment. And I think the homeschooling also allows that. I've been a Montessori practitioner also for 2 decades. One thing that I think that environment allows for students is the freedom in learning, right? There's so it builds intrinsic motivation opposed to in a lot of traditional settings where it's a bit more rigid. And as we all know with children, going back to what you just said with rebelliousness, everybody doesn't learn that way. So if you're trying to push information, you're just pushing information into a child, that's not necessarily the best way for them to receive it. And you want them to receive it, not them to feel as if you're imposing will on a child. Um, so that's kind of the way that I help those challenging moments, so to speak, and being flexible. I think you can be if being flexible will go a long way in supporting your children in the homeschooling environment, and ultimately, again, as an educator, if I was inflexible, I don't know that the students would have received the information that I was giving them very well, especially in the early years. You're not going to be rigid with young children. Then that's more of a battle than an environment that they want to learn and thrive in.
So for parents who are self-conscious and they're not sure if they would make good teachers, what are the programs and the aids that are out there to like get them started, to just kind of get them into the idea of how they should homeschool?
Well, I think ultimately in homeschooling, it's essential to find out what works best in your home, right? I'm not negating the professionals out there that have a specific way that this is the how-to, right? There's a lot of how-tos in this world, and I think that's great. However, you know your children best, right? So especially if you already had them in a traditional school system, okay, was my child thriving in this public school system and I just want to duplicate, or right? I want to duplicate that in the home, or do I want to have them as they say unschool, right? I want to actually I kind of want to remove them not only from the environment but from a particular type of thinking. So I think that you have to figure out what it is that you really want to create in the home for your children and then duplicate it in your home. What pedagogy are you trying to follow? I don't know necessarily that you have to turn, excuse me, to a homeschool method, but I think when you find out, okay, I'm supporting children from two two to four. How much do I know about development and the brain in the years between 2 and 4? Because ultimately, if I learn how to homeschool and I read the material, but I don't understand what's happening with the brain, then I think it's pointless as far as I'm concerned. So I highly advocate for parents, as much as we are, working at being parents, that you understand development period for your children's overall growth and their ability to thrive.
Yeah, and I think there's so much information out there nowadays. There's so many books, there's so many sources that if you need that extra aid, usually if you put in the effort, you'll find it. When you think about traditional schools and traditional school settings, kids are usually there from 8 in the morning, usually until almost three
Mhm.
something in the afternoon. And obviously, I've seen a lot of homeschooling families, and they normally do about 4 hours max or
Right.
tops. Why is that? Do you think that children, only need the 4 hours, or why do you think or do you think, I should say, that 4 hours is enough for, I guess, young children? And I'm not only talking early years, obviously, they don't
Mhm.
need too much structure because they need to run around and do stuff. But elementary years, for example, do you think that 4 hours is enough, or do you think that 8 hours is too much?
Again, I try not to use like blanketed. statements, kind of like an over, they kind of were for an overarching conversation, right? Because like you said, what you're saying for the early years is not what's happening. We're going back to development. Like these are worlds apart of what's happening with the brain, right? Between the early years, elementary and adolescence. So in the early years, I would say, at a couple hours, it could be amazing, right? You can have your formal or your informal circle time if you like. Are you following a play-based curriculum in the home where some people are just spending a great deal of time outdoors? We know children learn through play. you know how have you created that? For me, it's I have a hybrid. I have indoor play available for my children as well. um, I was a three-sport athlete and a retired women's soccer player, so the level of exposure that my children have in terms of play and informal playing and structured play is a little bit on steroids, so to speak. Some people might think, but they love it, right? But then at the same time, they don't know any different. So as long as they're enjoying it, the children will show you. But then on the other side, in the academic side, I also bring that Montessori background. And if you came into my home, it looked like the classroom I taught in, and they just move accordingly, and they know that they have that free range to pull out the work that speaks to them. I don't say, okay, it's been 40 minutes, we have to hurry up and clock out. And that is, I think, the difference is what we're talking about is the way that the children are kind of, you want to give them structure, of course, but I do believe in freedom within the structure, right? I have a schedule, but there's freedom within that. If I can see that my children are fatigued, if they're tired, if I have to flip snack, it's there. But guess what? In the traditional school system, you can't do that. That child is tired, and you're saying, "Oh, no, 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 we're not resting right now. That's it. That's it. That's at noon." You're like, okay, well, clearly the parents kept the child up. Maybe they had a difficult night. Maybe families in from out of town. So there's that lack of flexibility. Then it's very, again, these are the impacts on certain children. Maybe they didn't have a good breakfast. Maybe mom and dad are really busy. Somebody's traveling. So again, I think these are the benefits again with the homeschooling, but then also understanding, okay, let's have the flexibility again, and then understand for each of those different age groups, maybe those couple of hours. Your early years, absolutely. Elementary, you can, of course, you could double that. But by nature, children, and even us as adults, you're not built to be sitting down for long periods of hours at a time. But unfortunately, it started so early in the system that we've been put into, unless someone has come and helped you kind of unlearn that, or you have the freedom, you don't know any different. Hence desk jobs. You just go from one desk to the other. You just went at the desk in school, and then you pick up the next job and you get your W-2, and then you just sit in the chair for another eight hours, which is awful on your body. And it's not the best in terms of engaging the mind as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Well,
I think that a lot of times, it's more tradition, like you said, and the children's attention span after a while, anyways, they don't they can't do more than what their body is allowing them to do sometimes, and sometimes it's just forced for them just to comply, sit there and wait till the end of the day.
right.
What are some or critiques, I'm sorry, that a lot of people say about homeschooling, especially when it comes to socialization? Because I've heard a
Oh
thing
yeah.
or two about kids not having adequate friends and
Right,
social
right.
skills. What do you think about that?
Um, I've heard them. So what is it? So allegedly they lack, social skills, maybe deemed as being socially awkward. Um, just essentially saying that they don't generally connect in the same way that children in traditional environments do, um, which is very interesting. because I don't believe there's really data supporting that, more or less than there, more so I believe it is opinion. And I'm going to speak also anecdotally. So my own children continue to pleasantly surprise me because socially they will engage any child in any environment, whether it is a formal gathering, whether we went to the park, play groups, museums. Um, it's actually a bit more mature than the actual numerical age is has been my observation, not only just of my children, but it would make sense because of the way that information is being given to you, right? And the reason I'm saying that is in the homeschool environment, you're not you're curtailing that curriculum to how you see fit. Whereas in the public and the private sector, more times than not, they have a curriculum that they have to follow regardless of the development of the child. So if your child is reading at a second grade level, but they're actually, let's say, 4, in a lot of environments, they're like, okay, well, we can't provide anything to support your child at this time in that, right? We're not there. The group isn't there. So we can't then support your child at a second grade level because this is the age in which they're at. You see that? So I'm saying socially, a lot of those things apply as well. If my daughter wants to go to we're at the park and the child is, which happens more often than not, older than her, she's not intimidated by the size of the child, even if she doesn't know the age. But because she is confident and she's articulate, she will engage them like she would engage anybody else. So, and when that conversation is happening, you wouldn't then say, oh, okay, that must be a 4-year-old. If anything, more often than not, I usually hear people say to me, I'm sorry, ma'am, can you tell me how old she is? Because I heard her. I know why you're asking me, because what you're hearing does not match the frame of the, right? You may not know the age, but you're looking at the body and you're like, that's not supposed to come out of that child. So I think that, yes, that's anecdotal, but I've seen more of the latter than the question that was posed, that it's socially a challenge. If anything, there's a different level of freedom and confidence, not only just about socialization, but actually about the world, because the experiences are so vast, and that's you don't get to have that kind of hands-on experience usually in the public and the private sector.
Okay, and a lot of parents, especially in the States, because my page is also a faith-based page, a lot of parents who are deciding to homeschool their kids are homeschooling their kids because they want to make sure that their kids get a very good Christian education that sometimes is lacking, or they feel that in the public system they're being taught things that contradict some ideas from their the Christianity. So you, for example, are you practicing Christian? Have you incorporated religion into homeschooling, or do you think it's
So,
part of your homeschooling curriculum?
so I was raised Christian. My mom's a Christian. However, I wouldn't say it's infused heavily in my curriculum. What I will say, because you spoke about families choosing to homeschool for religious or faith-based reasons, I do agree that my husband and I did also choose to homeschool our children because there's also that sense of there are certain things in the school system that we do not want our children to be impacted by, and we don't want school to be the ones to introduce it to them. And again, in the first 5 years, because those are the formative years and critical in the child's development, that was a very large part of us deciding as a family. We're gonna start that schooling education process in our home.
Well, that's a very good point. And yes, I think that's a very, very serious concern of a lot of parents because there's a lot of changes happening with the education system. And, unfortunately, parents are not allowed to, give their opinions or decide in some instances what can be taught and what their children can be exposed to.
And let me say and let me say, because we're on this point, and I think it's really a great question that you posed, is that I think as parents we recognize it, but sometimes we have to sit back and reflect when we choose an environment for our children. As they're growing up, it's a lot harder to undo behaviors and things that they have learned than it is to not have them introduced at all and you to be the initial person to bring it to them. So as parents, my husband and I decided we're not gonna start off our children's journey this way by having to undo all of the either harmful or things that really go against our family beliefs and what we're instilling in both of our daughters.
Okay, so thank you so much, Annette. That was very insightful. And I thank you for coming with me today to just talk about homeschooling and talk about your opinion as an educator. And if you want to learn anything else about Annette, I think you also do program like you said, programs, lesson plans. I'm going to link any website that you have or any material that you have in the podcast for parents who are interested. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to sacredmindshift.com so you never miss an exciting event or episode. And God bless. Thank you, Annette.
Thank you so much, Dahlia. Take care.
You too.